In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can take our sculpt data, transfer it to really clean topology that we make, then project those details. Then we're going to use a tool called Transpose Master to transfer the pose to the different shapes. So I've actually taken the previous scenes that you've seen before, gone through and deleted out all the different elements that I don't need anymore. You cannot delete out any kind of primitives that you see within through here, but you can see I've really cleaned up my scene. I'm at the point where I know that I'm pretty much done with the sculpt, and then now this is the last part where I want to do some posing. So I've gone through and deleted out all the objects from here that I don't need, and I've kind of consolidated everything. So I've got a body, I've got the front shell, back shell, his eyes, this bag, the belt, and then the staff. And with those different objects, those are the things that I'm going to be using to actually take and pose this character. Now we're going to be using a process called Transpose Mesh, and it's basically what it's going to do is going to combine all the objects together into one object, so we can work on them as if they're one object. We pose it, and then we push it back to all these different pieces that we have. We could do this currently right now with the way that we have the model. It is going to make it a lot more difficult to use, because if you take a look at the density of the polygons, we have tons and tons of polygons. So if we merge everything together and we've got a bunch of different pieces, it's going to be really, really high res. So this process actually works better with subdivision levels. So you might be asking yourself, how do I translate this model from this state that it's in into having subdivision levels? So we're going to take a look at that. What we're going to do is I'm going to hide everything except for the body, and we'll start working on this first. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate the body. We don't have to rename it, but I'll just call this sub D. So we got a difference here. The reason I duplicated it, we need to save this off. We're going to actually project all the detail, everything that we sculpted from this model onto the new topology whenever we have it. So we need to have a version of that, and we need to keep it around. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure symmetry is turned on. We got symmetry turned on because our model is symmetrical. Now if your model is not symmetrical, you don't want symmetry on. But mine is symmetrical, so I'm going to leave that. And then I'm going to go to geometry. We're going to go to Z Remesher. And this is ZBrush's tool that they have within inside the program that will allow you to remesh something with good topology. We've looked at remeshing with Dynamesh, but this will actually make a really nice quad model. Now, target polygon count, this is 5, so 5,000 polys. I'm going to think for a character and kind of the detail level that I'm kind of hoping for and what I want to capture out of this. I'm going to probably take this at about 20,000 polys, around there. Now it's on adapt, so that doesn't mean it's going to give us an exact 20,000 polys. It's just going to try to get there, and it might have to adapt in certain areas and things like that. I don't really have any poly groups that I need to worry about or anything like that. It is possible that you can use a lot of these different options to try to detect creasing and poly groups and things like that. We're not going to go that advanced with things. So I'm just going to click the Z Remesher button and then let it analyze. And depending on the complexity of the model and how many polys it is, it might take a little bit more time. So I'm just going to pause this, and it should go fairly quick. And so here it is after it's remeshed the model, and it's actually picked up quite a bit of detail on there. Now if I wanted a lower resolution version of that model, I could drop that target polygon count down quite a bit. But this is pretty darn nice. It's got pretty decent topology for just doing that one button solution, and it does pick up some of the detail already on there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the model. So I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm going to divide it. And if I took it off solo and we turn on the visibility of the first model, turn off solo, you can see how it's kind of sticking through a little bit, and you can see we've matched the shape pretty darn closely. Now we need to start capturing the detail of this. So in order to do that, we're going to go down to project, and then this distance is going to say I'm going to search maybe out from this surface or in and try to shrink wrap this geometry to this geometry that it's going to project onto. So it's going to push either out and find a surface or push in and find a surface. And if it can't find it, maybe you need to up the distance, but you got to be a little bit careful with that because that could cause some issues if you're not careful. So I'm just going to hit project all, and I'm going to say no to the poly paint data. You can, if you've done poly painting on this, it will transfer that over too. So that's pretty nice as well. So I'm just going to put it on solo just so we can see what's going on with this. And what I need to do, I'm going to keep adding divisions to this until we capture fully all the detail on here and we've got enough resolution. So as we use subdivision levels, you can see if I hit Control D and add another subdivision level, turn polyframe off, turn it back on, we've got more geometry to work with. So basically, every time you that you divide in here, it will take a quad and it will turn it into 4 quads, and then the next subdivision level will take those 4 quads and take each one of those and then divide it into 4. So then you've got 16 quads at that point. So it keeps growing in that kind of way. So I'm going to turn off the polyframe and then I'll do project all again. Just hit no for that. I don't want the poly paint data. And you can see it's going to take a little bit. You might see ZBrush do this odd thing with your computer. It definitely takes quite a few resources for this. And as we go up in the poly count for this, it takes maybe a little bit longer to project this work. So that's going pretty close. The way that I usually kind of check on this is I'm on this model here. If I hit the up arrow key, it'll go to this subtool. And you can see how it kind of jumped and it looked at this versus this. So there's just a little bit more resolution on our original model than what we've got currently. You still see a little bit of the stair stepping that's going on here. So I'm going to add one more subdivision level to our model. Hit Control D. And then we're going to do one more project all. And I think this should capture everything. Now I did have some poly paint data on there. This time I'll just say yes, and it'll actually capture that detail. This one's probably going to take a little bit longer, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and let it finish out. Okay, it's finished up projecting over, and actually I just saw some very, very minor differences in some areas, so I added one more subdivision level to this and actually projected that over. So that by the time I got done, I have 5 subdivision levels on this model. And if we take a look at the poly frame information on there, you can see how dense this thing is. If we hover our cursor over, we can actually see how many polys this thing actually is. And so let me drop down in a few subdivision levels and just check this number. So at this point, this is 189,000 right there at that point. So that's at second subdivision level. If I tap D and then go up and then hover my cursor over there, I'll recalculate it. So that's 759,000. Tap D, go the next one up. So now we're at currently, you can see how that jumped up really quickly to 3 million polys at that point. And then if I go one more up, yeah, I have a crazy number of polys right now for this. So I was saying about 12 million polys for that. Pretty high amount, but for an entire full character with the kind of resolution that I needed at this stage, it's gonna be pretty darn dense. Sorry, I accidentally hit this view thing here, and it was pushing me around a little bit. So yeah, so the higher this thing goes, the longer it's going to take for that projection to happen. But now you can see I've got the model and it's fully captured, and I'm able to hit D to go up to subdivision levels and then hit Shift D to go down in subdivision levels. And what this is going to allow us to do is we can work on this lower subdivision level, make changes to it, and then step up in our subdivision levels, and it'll keep all the detail. So if we rotated the arm, it'll rotate the arm, and all this detail that we have on here will translate with it. So it just makes it easier for this process to kind of happen. Okay, so now that I've done that, I really don't need this body anymore, and we can go ahead and delete that out. Because otherwise we're going to get, this scene is going to start growing quite a bit. Now I will save this as a different version. So I had a version right before this that I cleaned everything out, and now I need to save another version after I'm going to clean up and do this entire process like that. So we've got that. I really should go through for each one of these pieces, like what you see here. Maybe this one will go a little bit faster. Let's try this one. Let's just go ahead and duplicate this. So I'm going to rename this one again. I'll do front shell, and I'll do sub D, like that. I've got it on solo, so I'm just taking a look at that. If I go to the geometry and we're taking a look at Z Remesher, probably don't need 20,000 for this one. I'll just leave it at the target poly count of 5,000. Hit Z Remesh. Give it a second. See what it does. This model, because of the sculpting that I've done on it, it shouldn't be symmetrical. I've got some asymmetrical parts to it that might cause an issue. I didn't have symmetry on, so that's actually a good thing. Now, if I had symmetry on, it would probably give me some different results, and it wouldn't capture that that look correctly. So that's actually good that that was symmetry was turned off for that. So we've got this on the model. If you see anything that's weird about the topology before you project over, you might just lightly smooth some of those things out. Looks like everything's going to be pretty good. So again, we only want to project what is visible. So we need to see this shell. We should turn the body visibility off. And now I'm going to step up in subdivision levels, hit Control D. I'm going to do 2 of them just because we're a little bit lower resolution on this model. And then let's go to project, and then we'll do project all. I'll just say yes. Let's just translate or transfer over the poly paint data. And you can see we're getting pretty close already with just 2 subdivision levels. I'm going to hit Control D one more time, and let's just hit Control D another time and project all. It's going to take a little bit longer to do this. The safest way is to do this, like do one subdivision, project, do another subdivision, project. It does take longer to do that, but I've noticed that that gives me the best results. Now, I've heard from some of the people at Pixelogic that you could just do it all in one go, and you can. I just know that that's caused some issues before. The other thing we could have done with the body is if we would have stored a morph target on the body before we did the projection. If there's any parts that were weird about the projection, we could use the morph brush and then morph out those problem areas, and you might have to resculpt an area just a little bit. So I'm going to hit the arrow key. If you remember how we were taking a look at our different models, and I really don't see a difference in the models now that I'm stepping in between these. So I can get rid of this one. I don't need the old version, and then now I've got this new version with subdivisions, and I've captured the model. Okay, I'm going to save the file, and I think it's pretty important after you do each one of these steps, you're kind of backing up your work at that point. We've got the back shell, and I can go ahead and duplicate that, rename it, call this sub D, just like that. We'll do a zero mesh, and this one is not symmetrical either. There's been some asymmetrical changes that have happened to this thing. So I'm going to tap X to turn symmetry off for that. And then on this one, I think I'll go a little bit higher. The first one, was, the front shell was 5,000 for a target. The body was 20, so maybe I'll go 10 with this one. Click Z Remesh. and see what this ends up giving us at that point. And this one's just a little bit more complex, so it's just going to take a little bit more time to generate through. And I think the results probably should look pretty decent with this one too. And you can see all the detail that it's already kind of captured for this. We'll turn on the polyframe just to take a look at it. So let's do this. Let's try just adding 4 subdivision levels. We'll hit Control D, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me hit undo for that. So we've got 4 subdivision levels. Let's just keep it there. And let's just do a project all, but before we do, let's check and make sure we don't have anything else turned on. So we don't want that front shell to be visible. We only want to project from this part to this part. So let's turn on the visibility of that back shell, make sure that's visible, and let's hit project all. So you might have noticed for just a second this project all was grayed out, and that's because I didn't have any of the subtools visible, so I didn't really know what to do at that point. So looks okay. Let's step up. I'm going to hit the up arrow key. Here's our original one with the Dynamesh, and then here's our new project. So we're not quite there. Control D, 1 more subdivision level, and we'll do a project all. And again, this is going to take just a little bit more time. I'll pause it. Okay, the projection is finished, and so here's the results that we have. There is a slight difference in between these. It's not a huge difference. I think it's enough that I will feel comfortable with that. It did feel like it's maybe this, the Dynamesh version was just a little bit stronger as far as detail, just ever so slightly. If I wanted, we could do that whole thing where we store the morph target. We could polish it, let it polish, switch our morph target, and then do a negative morph slider here. And then that would give us some of our detail back. Okay, so that polish was done. Just pause it for just a second, and then I can hit switch and then take the morph slider and kind of drag it this direction just a little bit, just to tighten up some of those details. I'll delete the morph target, don't really need that anymore. So I feel like we've probably done a pretty good job of capturing. I'll delete that. Don't need the shell anymore. We got our sub D version, and let's just go ahead and save the file. Again, I want to do that every single time. The eyes, let's see what we got here for eyes. Yeah, we've already got subdivision levels on these. Just going to check that and make sure, yeah, we've got just 2 subdivision levels. So I'll just go ahead and leave those. We don't have to do anything with the eyes. And then the bag. Let's take a look at that, duplicate that. I'm going to rename it in sub D. And I'll make sure that this visibility of that part's on, and that's the only thing that we are seeing visible is these 2 things. We'll go here, we'll go to our Z remesh, and I think 5000 for that will be probably pretty good. Should probably capture the shape fairly well for us. Then it might just take a second to run through. I'll pause it. Okay, here we are with that object, and you can take a look. Looks pretty good. It's even crazy how it captures some of this little stitching and everything else like that. So it's just a pretty darn amazing tool. For what we need, we don't need crazy, super accurate topology for stuff. Now, if you were doing this for a game or something like that, you would probably have to do this by hand. So this is really nice for a 1-button solution. So let's try this. Seems like the magic number if we add subdivision levels to this. Let's hit Control D, 1, 2, 3, and then another one. Let's get to 5 subdivision levels on there, and then let's do a project all. And I'll just even project over the polypaint data. Let it run through. Let me pause this and come back. Okay, here's the projection. I'll turn off the polyframe. Just take a look. And I don't see any kind of difference between the two meshes as I switch through them. Let's just go ahead and delete this one. And we'll save it. Just like that. And we're getting very, very close to being completely done here. Let's go to the belt. And let's do this. Let's go ahead and duplicate it, just like we've been doing before, and rename it like that. The only thing that I was just a little bit concerned about is all this rough detail that I've got on the backside. Didn't even realize that it was there. I don't really want it to pick that up, but I think it's fine. It probably won't hurt anything. But if I did something like this before we Z-remesh, maybe it helps just a little bit. Yeah. But anyways, I'll just go ahead and do that. And this time for Z-remesh, let's just leave it at 5. Actually, there's a lot of shape to kind of capture for this. I might go higher for this one. So let's go 7. Click Z-remesh. Okay, so you can see the results of this one. Let's just go ahead and hit Control D, 1, 2, 3, and I'll put it up to 5 subdivision levels, and just make sure that that's the only thing is visible is our belt. Turn this one off, and then we'll do a project all. I'll even transfer over the polypaint data, which it was just a solid color, so nothing special about that. I'll pause the video, let it come back after it's projected. Okay, and here's the projection. And I think for the staff, there's quite a bit going on with this, and I know I'm just going to be moving this as one big giant solid piece. So I don't think I'm not too worried about this one. I might just move this thing completely separate. So I'm just going to keep everything the way that it is for this one. I don't want to project all this. So I'm going to go to this belt. I'm going to delete the belt. We've got our sub D. I'll turn off solo. Hold down shift and then select visibility. So we've turned on visibility of everything, and I think the staff has even got the morph target still on here for this, like that. So I will go ahead and push this right here, say file, save as, and here's all the different models all cleaned up at this particular stage. So the next stage is going to be us using the tool to go ahead and prep the models, and it'll push this down to the low subdivision level for all the different models that we're going to use to pose, and then we'll be able to pose that mesh, and then we'll transfer it all back to these different various pieces. Before we get started in this next section, I just wanted to draw to your attention that I've made some past videos that really go into depth on this whole workflow that I'm about to show you. I'm going to try to show you maybe a faster version, a much more condensed version. But you can see this one that's called ZBrush posing a character using Transpose Master. That one's about 35 minutes long, and that'll kind of cover maybe closely like what we're going to be taking a look at. I also have some information for how you can use Maya if you wanted to set up a skeleton and you wanted to make sure that you could continue to make multiple poses with this, and you wanted to use a skeleton and you want to use the skin weighting that exists within inside of Maya. If you know that process, these videos might actually make a lot more sense to you. Basically, you're going to be able to push the work over to Maya, use the skeleton, use the weighting tools, pose it, and then push that back over to ZBrush and then transfer it to all your different pieces. So again, before we get started on this, I just wanted to draw this to your attention that if this goes a little bit too fast for you and you want a really in-depth explanation of all this and maybe some more advanced topics on how to pose, these videos exist for you, and you can take a look at that at your own leisure. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this. And again, we've done all the work for prepping all of our models. So we've got subdivision levels on all of our different pieces, except for the staff that we have here. I'm going to go to the plugins area and let's go ahead and dock this. You can dock it over to this direction or this direction. It's up to you. I'm just going to click this. I like to put my plugin information over here on this side. And then we're going to look for a thing called Transpose Master that you see right here. So we'll go ahead and open that up. Now, when we start this thing off, there's quite a few different options that we could potentially use. You could actually even make a skeleton inside a ZBrush and make a Z-sphere rig and everything else like that. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to want to make sure, I'm going to just turn on layers. This won't really matter until you actually transfer the stuff back over, but I'm just going to put it on there anyways just to make sure that I have it. What that'll do is whenever we push everything over, it will actually make layers for everything that we push over, so it becomes non-destructive at that point, so that you can turn on and off the pose information. And I do think that's a pretty smart thing to do, and it's probably pretty important to make sure that you can always get back to the what you would consider the base pose. So the other thing is if you turn on groups, if you turn this on, if you've got polygroup information on the different parts, it will actually preserve that and keep that. Now I don't think I have anything too specific for polygroup information on the models that I have that I want to keep. I might have some on the staff, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on and just keep that. And then after we have those options set, I'm going to go ahead and click this Transpose Mesh. It's going to go through the different models, drop them down to the low subdivision level, and then after it does that, it's going to merge everything together and make a brand new mesh, and then you'll see it get stored over here in this area, and it's going to be called this Transpose underscore whatever the name of that, maybe that top model was at the time. So if I turn on the polyframe information for this, you can see it did preserve the groups that we have. Now there's not group information on the shell and these different parts, but there is a way that we can grab this stuff pretty easily. So if you hold down Control and Shift, drag a marquee over an area, and if you want to grow out the visibility to where everything's visible, you can hit Control Shift A, and that will grow out the visibility like that. And now I can hit Control W, and that will make a polygroup out of that. If I want to bring everything back, Control Shift click in the open viewport like that. And then now I'm just going to go to a section here, Control Shift, drag a marquee around it, Control Shift A, and then I'll hit Control W, and then I'll hold down Control Shift, click in the open viewport, go to this next part for the shell, Control Shift, click on just one part of that and grab just one face, Control Shift A, Control W, Control Shift click like that, and we're getting pretty close here. I'm going to hold down Control Shift, drag, grab one poly like that, Control Shift A, Control W, and that grabbed everything because this mesh has been welded together, so it's all one piece like that. Control Shift click in the open viewport to bring everything back. And then now I've got everything nice and easy to be separated for the different pieces that I've got. Okay, so that's the first step in getting everything prepped to get this mesh. In this next part, we'll start to take a look at how we can actually use masking and start to pose this. So for this process, we're going to be taking a look at a new tool, and it's called the Transpose Tool. So normally if we had it on the Gizmo 3D, you can see we've got move, scale, and rotate, and it all exists within this one tool that we have here. If we turn off the Gizmo 3D, this turns into what is considered the transpose line. And this does the same things. You can move, scale, and rotate with this tool. It was actually the first tool that was introduced inside of ZBrush. It's very versatile for what it can do. So it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife in ways, and it has lots of different functionalities to it. The only thing is it's probably a lot more confusing for newer users to use this thing. So if we do put it on move, let's just take a look at that real quick. We'll put it on move, and you can just click and drag out anywhere off the object like this, and it will draw what is considered an action line. Now with these three circles here, if you click the outer one, you can move this endpoint here. If you click this point within here, you can move this, and if you click this one in the middle, you can drag the entire line. You can also click on the line, and you can move the line that way as well. So you might be asking yourself right off the bat, you're like, what's the benefit of this anyways? So when we get into this section and what we're going to be using this tool for, you can use the tool as if almost like it's a temporary bone that you're putting within the object. And we could move, and we could scale, and we can rotate as if we're doing that from the position of a bone within here. So that's why it's kind of powerful for that. Now you just saw it is very, very easy to accidentally grab this center point here, and then it expects that you're going to be doing something with it, or it thinks that you just want to drag out a new copy with things for stuff on there. So you got to be real careful with this one. And to me, this tool, probably the biggest annoyance of it is there's no undo for if you kind of mess up the line, you just got to redraw it out and you got to reposition it. So that's my biggest gripe with this tool, and it's probably going to frustrate you as well to some degree, just because you can see like there, I just wanted to move this endpoint, and if I'm not super careful with how I move it, I have to redraw the line and reset everything up like that. So unfortunately, like I said, with the Gizmo tool, those things exist. So what I guess I could tell you to try to make sure that you don't kind of have it do something it's not wanting to do, right? If I hover my cursor over each one of these circles, and this seems to be, to me, the problem with the Transpose tool line, setting it up, is accidentally not, like, look how close my cursor is to this circle, and you would think that I should be able to grab it, but it's not highlighted, and if I click to move it, I would actually be redrawing out a whole new line. So make sure, just take a few little seconds to hover your cursor over the circles, make sure it's highlighted, and then once it's highlighted, click and drag and you can move it. Now I like to move pretty quick at times, and so that becomes kind of an annoyance for me. So let's talk about this movement thing. So first off, we can click and drag in the middle circle, and this acts like a complete transpose tool and moves this thing around. It's kind of chugging a little bit because my object's pretty dense. It's not crazy dense, but it's pretty dense. If I want to move along this actual line as a vector, as a direction for this, and have it snap to that, I can click and hold down shift, and whenever I drag, I can drag along that line and it's going to move very specific along that line. Okay, so that's probably not the thing. The thing that we're going to be using most is probably rotate. So if you use rotate, if we set this thing up, this becomes a pivot point or a lever, and then this becomes a pivot point or a lever, and then this becomes twist. So if I were to click this center part here, click and drag, you can see how that point down there becomes the lever to rotate about. I'll hit undo for that. If I want to rotate from here, this becomes the new lever, and I rotate about that point like that. If I go here and click on the center and click and drag, I'm going to rotate the object around that axis. Now with this alone, you can tell if we would mask out everything on the model except for the arm, we could have moved the arm and posed it up this way here. If we went this direction, that's not really going to be helpful for us, but if we wanted to build twist through the arm, we could twist the arm with this one. We would have to have a nice gradient kind of going down the length of the arm, and that would give us everything that we need for that. Now we could take it off this tool. If you put it back on move and have it on the transpose, it keeps the recognition of where that line was at before you clicked off of it, so that's kind of cool. What that'll allow us to do is go through and we can go and we can paint a mask on everything. So I could do this, I could hold down control and just click in the open viewport like that, and it'll mask everything that we see here. Now if we've got polygroup information, I can hold down control and shift and I could click on just the body, and if I want, I don't have symmetry on, and that's good for this particular section, I'm going to hold down control and then alt, and I can paint out a mask at that point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the area for the arm that I want to move. Actually, I'm going to paint out the mask for the area for the arm that I don't want to move on here. And if I follow some of the muscle structure and things of the elbow a little bit, then we can get some pretty good results. And I'll try to work around the muscle structure that I've got here And I'll want this to come down here like that. If you remember with masks, we can hold down Control and click any part of the mask that's already been drawn, and it'll soften that up. If you hold down Control and Alt, we can tighten up a mask. And again, we can always draw a mask on here, holding down Control. If you want to get rid of a mask and paint it out, you can hold down Control and Alt like that. So with all those tools, this becomes the method for how you could paint out or paint in areas that you want to hold or you want to expose for the transpose line. Okay, so that's pretty good. Control Shift click in the open viewport will bring everything back. Now I can put it on the Transpose tool, and again I'm going to hover my cursor in the center, and now I can click and drag. Sorry, I have it on move. Let's just take a look at this real quick and the difference between move. Move will let me stretch this thing out and kind of scale it. So I know that feels weird, and you might be going, well, wouldn't that be scaling? It kind of feels that way to a point, but really you are moving all these points and these are being masked. So it is a movement in a way. Now if we did scale, if we click and drag, you can see we could shrink something down uniformly or not, and this becomes the pivot point for that. If we click and we drag this way, we're going to scale uniformly, and it's going to use this as the pivot point. If we click and drag this way, it's going to scale in just 2 axes for us. So we just turn this into, I guess, a big Hellboy arm or something like that. Now for rotate, we've already looked at the thing we were talking about with a lever. So I'm going to just kind of bend this thing up this way just a little bit like that. And I would need to evaluate this. See how I might like how it's bunching up there like that. I really don't. What I'm going to want to do here is take it off the tool, put on draw, hold down Control, and I'm going to really kind of blur out this mask quite a bit. So now I'll put it back on the Transpose tool, rotate, and I'll rotate this into position like this. Now that will probably get us a good part of the way there, and what I'm going to want to do at that point is go through, and we might have to do a little bit of sculpting on this to finesse this and get this all kind of fixed up at that point. Now what I did notice through this is it would be kind of cool to rotate this out just a little bit. So I'm twisting the arm, and then now I'm going to pull this up here and then maybe push this over just a little bit like that. And then now you can see I'm starting to build this to where it feels like maybe he's putting his hand on that pouch like that. Okay, so you can see that we got to be a little bit careful with what we're doing on here. You can see it could tear up the mesh quite a bit, but then usually you're gonna have to get it in a pretty good state. Maybe hold down Shift, lightly kind of smooth some of this stuff out. Now muscles do kind of expand and contract and run into each other, so you might use the inflate and actually let this area kind of run into each other a little. So now you're using a combination of these tools with sculpting to build out whatever that final shape is that you see here for this. Okay. And I might put it on the move tool. You've got at your disposal for sculpting, you've got every single tool that we've already looked at. So there's no restriction on what you can do with this mesh. It's just we're using the Transpose tool and the Transpose line as that temporary bone to get us into position for that. And you can see with this, if I wanted to take the fingers, now I don't want to move this part and this part. Since we got polygroups for this, if you remember, we can go to B and then M, and then we got move topological. That will allow me to just to select this part, select it because it's a polygroup and it's different than the this bag because of the polygroup information, and it'll let me just select that and move that around. So that becomes a pretty powerful little workflow for us to get this thing in location. I'm going to push this over a bit more and just try to have this not intersect as much with this. Kind of like this. And so I think I will just leave this here like that, and maybe I push this forward a little bit. Again, this is just, you can spend a lot of time with this part trying to finesse everything and make sure everything looks really good. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to take his other arm and I'm going to pull it up as if he's reaching out and he's taking his staff and kind of holding it that way. Before I do that, I just wanted to see about grabbing his hip on one side and then pulling that down just a little bit. And just trying to build just a little bit of difference between the weight on one hip versus the other. So a little contrapposto on there. Now I want to move this leg back, and I don't want to move it up or down because it's sitting on the ground plane. So on my interface, I've got this XYZ, and I can turn that off, and I can just move X and Z on there. That actually exists under transform, and the transform information is right up here, those buttons. So you see X, Y, Z, and then X, Y, Z right here. So we can turn on and off those parts. And then now I can just click and drag this foot, and I'm going to drag it back ever so slightly, just to build a little bit of a difference between those. And then maybe I'll take the tail and then move this down and off to the side a little bit. So I'm not building huge differences with what's going on with the pose. But again, I just want to give the illusion that maybe there's a little bit more weight on the character, like this. And maybe I pull this leg forward just a little bit. So now there's a little bit, we're starting to get a little bit of a difference between the right and the left side. And I'll take this off and maybe dip this side down just a little bit more. Like this. Okay, I think that's pretty good there. So the next thing I want to show you with this transpose tool that is actually pretty powerful is if we hold down Control and then click and drag out on the mesh, it will mask everything out. It'll recognize the topology and the flow of the topology, and it will try to build a mask based off the direction. So that's why I was saying this is a kind of a Swiss Army knife for tools. So I'm going to hold down Control and then click and then drag, and I'm going to go a little bit higher and go right about here for that. And now we can click off of that. If you want to hold down Control and Shift and click on the body, we can get to that, and we could paint in our mask just like we did before. Hold down Control, paint in here, hold down Control, and then we're going to do this, and then hold down Control, and then smooth this out just a little bit like that. And then now I'm going to put this on here. Actually, I'm going to twist this arm a little bit more so it's a little bit more straight. And so I'm going to build more of a mask going down through here and then smooth it out quite a bit. And then we're going to put on the rotate. We're going to click and drag out from where the elbow would be to the wrist. Now remember, we got to go to these circular parts, be kind of careful about it, and pull this around. Now there is some kind of a snapping motion that happens with this. I want to put this right where the wrist would be, and you do need to rotate it around and check it in multiple angles. So I'll push this here. Let's go to this part, click and drag right in the center where the elbow would be, and the elbow kind of goes more towards the back of the arm just a little bit right in here. And so I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to drag this out right here just a little bit. And again, I'm going slow because I'm trying to be careful. Now I can use the center part and I can just twist the arm a bit like that right here. So that's going to give us everything we need for the twist. And then now I can hold down Control and click and drag, and it will give me the mask this way with the arm if I want to go that direction with it. Let's see here. If I tap X, I don't want symmetry turned on, so I'll turn symmetry off. And then maybe I just got to find like what's the best way to do this, because I'm trying to basically draw out from the body and then have it mask most of this part here for the object. And I might find that the best way to kind of go about this is that maybe I build so much for a mask like this, and I might just find that I have to hand paint this. So we could always do the inverse of a mask too. So if I want to mask out, let's say the arm, and I want to expose this, I could go the opposite direction too first. So I could just paint the mask and we could invert that. So let's do that. Let's go in through here, get a nice clean shape for the arm for what we want to do for movement for that. Control click in the open viewport like that will invert our mask. And again, we can hold down Control and we can really smooth this thing out. And maybe I paint on here some more. Hold down Control and click to smooth out the mask. And then let's bring everything back. Control Shift click will bring everything back. And then now just that arm is unmasked. And we can click and drag out a new transpose line. I'm just going to go from the shoulder to the wrist like that. And then let's fix this up. I'm going to click and drag this to the center of the wrist. I'm going to be a little bit careful about this and move this, so make sure that that's highlighted. Click and drag into the center here, and I think that looks pretty good. Just going to check it from these different angles, and I'm going to move this back just a little bit more like that. And so now I've got that in position. This is going to become my lever to rotate, and I'm going to click and drag in the center part here like this. And as I move this, it feels to me like I want this to rotate more of that. So what I'm going to do is take it off the Transpose tool, hold down Control, just start holding down Control, clicking on here to kind of spam this to soften up this mask a little bit more. And actually I will hold down Control and Alt and then paint out the mask just a little bit more in this area, and hold down Control and smooth that out. Now let's put this back on this this rotate. We got something like that, and you can see how it's kind of, it feels like it's moving all this skin for us at that point. I'm going to pull the arm out a little bit more, and let's just be, I'm going to be heavy-handed with it and try to get the arm kind of close to where I want it. So I'm going to bend from the elbow and bend up after this. But I'm going to take it off of here. While we have everything masked, I can put on the move tool, and let's start to use the move brush to manipulate. And maybe this comes up a little bit like that and through there. Maybe we need to inflate this part of the arm to make it expand back out because it felt like it lost some of the volume to it. And I think we're pretty good here. I'll put it back on the move brush and then just kind of finesse this back and then make sure the shapes look good for that. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for this part. And now I will put it back on the Transpose tool. Remember, hold down Control and we can click and drag out along here like that. So I think that's going to be pretty good for the arm area. And let's just hold down Control and click to invert the mask here. Now we've got this issue where these parts are not masked and this part is. Let's hold on Control and Shift, click the body, And then if we hold down Control and Shift and click in the open viewport, if we hold down Control and Shift and drag in the open viewport, that will give us the inverse of what's visible. Now, if we have everything visible like this, we can just hold down Control and then click, and it'll mask all those pieces. So that's the power of the polygroup information and making sure you have that set up. So hold down Control Shift, click back in here, and that brings back all the other pieces. Now I'm going to hold down Control, kind of spam on this a bit so we can get the arm. Would put it back on the Transpose tool. I'm just going to click and drag out from the elbow to the wrist. And now I can take this part, move it up, take this part here, and see, I messed up. I was trying to be as careful as I was. It still grabbed that like we're going to be dragging on a new line. So again, part of my frustration of using this tool. So put this in the wrist. Let's get this up here. Put this where the elbow goes. And let's go right here like that. And did it again. So let's go here. Right here. And I'm just having a time with this. Trying to see if I were to zoom in, that doesn't seem to even help with this. So we got that. I guess it kind of depends on the angle that I go from and what we're looking at for this manipulator, because you can make the alignment go with these different axes, so that's why they have it on there, but it does seem to get in the way at times. And so I felt like I was doing a pretty good job until now. And so then there we go. There's that. Drag this part right here. And I'm just going to say a future request. That would be really, really nice if they built in some controls for just adding an undo to that tool would be amazing and would help out that situation quite a bit. So we got that. Now what I can do is I can invert my mask, because I got this bigger chunky part of his arm here, and I would like to move this muscle up and move this around just a little bit. Now I do have to be careful. It's kind of pulling on here. So if we do go to move topological, I'll go to B and then M, then find move topological. I could make sure I'm just clicking on that arm. And I do think that's probably the right one to be using in a lot of the cases for this, just so we don't accidentally move some parts of other things that we don't want to have affected. That'd probably be smart to do. And then now I want to rotate the wrist out just a little bit. I guess before I do that, it would probably make sense to get the staff in a location that would be good. And so let's hold on Control and Shift, click on the parts for this. And I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and then drag a thing in the open viewport like this to give me the inverse of that. And if you remember that trick, Control Shift A will give us the visibility of everything, right? I really don't need to pick all these parts like this all the time. So if we hit Control W, that'll just make it way easier just to select all the staff at that point. So if I hold on Control, click, we can mask it. Control Shift, click. We've got that. If I want to invert the mask, Control, click. And then now we can put in the Transpose tool. Now, if you feel more comfortable at this point going back to the Gizmo 3D, you can use the Gizmo 3D at any point for this. I just wanted to show you the Transpose tool. So it is possible that we could hold down Alt and then click and drag this. If we click that, holding down Alt, it goes to the unmasked center. Then if you want to rotate the The pivot point of the Transpose tool, you can hold down Alt and then click these and it won't affect the object at all. If you want to hold down Alt and click on that, this will reset this to world X, Y, and Z. And then so, yeah, if I want to hold down Alt and match kind of this angle for that, it's possible that I could do that. And then now I can just click and drag the staff and move that around and try to get that. So I'll tap P to go into turn off perspective, so I can kind of make sure I'm pushing this to the edge of the floor, just like that. And I think that works. And I'll hold down Alt for the orientation of the pivot point. And I think I'm going to just have this staff kind of at this angle like this. And push it right there. So I think that feels pretty good. Just trying to see what maybe looks good now as far as the orientation of this thing. If it would look a little bit better from a silhouette standpoint. That looks a little weird to me. If it's turned in just a little bit, could be interesting, but really probably feels best from a weight standpoint if it was kind of just aligned with the arm and the hand this way, kind of like that. I think that feels a bit more natural to me. So I think that that works. And let's see here. The last part that I would like to do is maybe get some twist on the head. And for this, I just want the eyes and the body. And so I'm going to hold on Control and Shift, click on the body, hold on Control and Shift, click again. That gives us the inverse of what we were looking at. Ooh, now here's a problem. I missed some little part of this this thing here, moving this object in here. So let's just take a look at that real quick. I'm going to do Control Shift, click on this part, Control Shift A to select everything, and it must be that that is some separate piece from everything. So I'm not exactly sure what part that was inside of that. Maybe it's the bottom of something. So I'm just going to drag across everything, hit Control Shift A like that. That'll give me these parts. And if I click on this, this gives me this here. Now I know that this is hidden, so I'm just going to smooth this out and maybe move it in. Yeah, and that's hidden under there somewhere. So it's not the best way to clean that up, but that'll work. Okay, back to where we were at before. Now we need the body. Control Shift, click on here. Control Shift, click again, and I want the eyes. Control Shift, click on the eyes. I need the inverse of this. Control Shift, drag, gives me the inverse of that. And then now we could use the Transpose tool, hold down Control, click and drag out like this. Sorry, we were on the Gizmo tool. Looks like the Gizmo tool will work with that same functionality too. It just feels maybe a little bit more odd doing it that way. And so what I'm trying to do is build a mask around the neck, and I want to really soften that up quite a bit. Now this is where this could come in handy for us, where we could use the rotation point and put this on the Gizmo tool, and we could hold down Alt, click on go to Unmask Center Point. Remember, if we hold down Alt, we can change the pivot point. We can hold down Alt and we can change the orientation of this stuff. So I'm going to try to imagine a bone being in the neck right around here, and I'm going to hold down Alt and then change the orientation to kind of match maybe where I think that bone would be traveling through the head like this. And so now that I've had that, I can just lift this up. Sorry, I didn't realize with the Transpose tool and masking like that, it looks at the topology, so we got to unmask this. So if I hold on Control and drag a marquee out, and if I add Alt to it, that will unmask. So I'm going to unmask the eyes, and then now let's go back to that tool and we can lift the head up just a little bit. I'm going to make him look like he's looking off into the distance just a little bit, and then maybe for some appeal, kind of with the character, just tilt his head just a little bit, like you know, when a dog just kind of like, huh, what? So that could be somewhat a little bit cute. And I'm going to hold down Control, soften off this mask a little bit, put on the move brush, kind of finesse this. And this is where this becomes maybe slightly difficult. Not too bad, but we're pulling in a lot of different tools, and we're smoothing, and we're sculpting, and moving things, checking weight. So it's going to pull a lot of disciplines at this point. The posing part, the better you are at animation and things like that, that can kind of inform you about how to pose the character, because you know something about weight distribution, and then it goes into this whole appeal factor for what becomes an appealing pose at that point, and what becomes kind of powerful for what a pose actually means. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's going to take you a lot of times. I would say this is not my strong suit, and if I had to admit, I would need to get better at this part, especially for the things that I want to do with figurative sculpture, and trying to make more compelling and convincing models in that regards. So I think that's looking pretty decent for what I want. I might drag this down just a little bit more through here. So again, you could spend tons and tons of time on this. And I'm going to hold down Control Shift, bring everything back, turn on perspective, put it in my camera view like this that we've been looking at. And I think that's looking pretty interesting now. Okay, so I'm going to save the file, and I think that's pretty important. And then in this next step, we will transpose, we'll move all this data over to our model with all the subdivision levels, and take a look at that, okay? Okay, the final part for this, let's go ahead and go back to our Transpose Master plugin, and you can see instead of the T-pose mesh, now we've got a T-pose slash sub T. So that's T-pose to your sub tool meshes that you've got. And if you click that on there and just hover your cursor, it'll tell you kind of what to do. And again, I had it on groups. I put this on layer, and I want to make sure that it's going to create layers for all the different pieces. So let's go ahead and click this, and it will go through, run through, and start applying this to each one of those different shapes behind the scenes, making a layer for each one of these shapes. And it's putting that pose information on there. It's definitely an interesting process to watch. We've got that right there. Now it does look like maybe the shell, I just should have taken a better look at the shell. I'm not super happy with the way that the shell moved over like that. Now, one thing I could do is we could go back to the T-pose mesh, and then we could still push that over. So let's take a look at that. Let's see if we can move this. And I'm going to hold on Control Shift, just click on the mask, or the shell with a mask, and I need to mask this, so I'm going to hold on Control, click on it, Control Shift click to bring everything back. I want the inverse of this mask, Control click, and then I'm just going to use the gizmo tool, because the shell should be hard. I can hold on Alt, click on that, go to the unmasked center of this. I want to take a look at the orientation. I'm going to hold down Alt and then click and drag this to change the pivot of this, what I think this object should be at. something kind of like that. And then now I'm going to take the shell, kind of rotate it this way, and then maybe even move it over here just a little bit. Maybe I'll move it up. So maybe we can imagine as that arm went back, kind of push the shell out just a little bit. As the arm moved forward, kind of pulls this up and through here. Just a little bit, like that. Now we still have the ability that we could do some sculpting on here. So if I put on the move brush, just going to kind of finesse this around the arm a little bit more. Okay. And I am curious about this. If I do some changes to this mesh and we send that back over, what's going to happen with the data for everything? And I'm just changing just a little bit about the weight of the character. Just trying to make it feel maybe a little less stiff. Okay, there we go. All right, let's try to push it one more time and see what we get here. It's going to update, go through. And when it's done, we're going to check it. It might actually make 2 layers for us and have 2 different layers on there at that point. So let's take a look at it. I definitely move the shell and all those pieces. If we take a look at the actual object itself, like the body, I'm going to turn off the polyframe real quick. If we open up layers, I'm going to hold down Shift to open up this at the same time. Yeah, so that's what it did. It added two layers for us. If we turn off one of the layers, you can see that. And then this second one was actually just like those minor tweaks that we did on top of everything. So now if you wanted to start to sculpt on this, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to move this and it's going to say, hey, you've got these layers and you can't do anything to this because these layers are on. They're not in a recording mode. Layers can be visible. They've got a slider that you can do for how much of that morph target or that layer is actually influencing things. So let's put this back at 1. And they're on. You can turn them on or off like that. Now, this is a layer. This becomes almost like what you can consider a corrective. And if we want to do one more corrective, let's say we want to take a look at the model and kind of finesse it now that we see it high res like this, we would have to make another layer. It'll make a new layer. It'll put it in what is called the recording mode. And at that point, you're able to come through and we can start to tweak this out. Now, at this stage, when you move the low res mesh with the T-pose thing, you're never really going to know exactly how it's going to push and pull the high res model around. So it's probably good at this stage to go back through and then just kind of finesse this. And if there's some weird stuff that happened with the mesh and kind of pulled it around in a way that you're not happy with, this is your opportunity to come through and sculpt on top of it. This still is non-destructive. So anything that we're doing on this, we're doing it on these layers, and we can turn off the layers, and we don't have to worry about it hurting our original mesh that we started off with. So it is a nice workflow from that standpoint. And if you are going to do something like let's say a collectibles or something like that, it will allow you to sculpt in that T-pose kind of mesh that we are in, or A-pose, whatever you want to call it. And then it will allow you to come back through, build posing data, and then kind of fix that up. So with each one of these shapes, I'm holding down Alt and then clicking on the belt. If we take a look at that, I'm going to have to add one of these new layers for that, put it in the recording mode, and then I can kind of tweak this and finesse that a little bit more like that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the body, just do this. And again, I don't see anything that's super odd with the shapes. I like, for the most part, kind of how it pushed everything over. Again, we might have to just kind of tweak some of these shapes just a little bit to get them in order. But for the most part, I think this is working pretty well. So I'm going to make sure there's no symmetry turned on with this. Pull this over just a little bit more and just do one last check for this, and then maybe now at this point, trying to think what would be a good camera view to kind of show this off. So I'll just rotate it, kind of stage it up, kind of like this. I've got the floor turned on, so I'll store a camera, and I have 6 cameras, so I'll just do a name for that. Again, remember the camera information goes under draw. It just happens to be here in my interface like that. So I'll do that. I'll do a BPR render. And I think that will call it for this entire series for just an introduction to digital sculpture. So we're just really scratching the surface for all the different tools that exist within inside of ZBrush. There's tons and tons of tools. Again, we've just really taken a really quick look at some of these various tools that exist within the program, and it's super versatile. I would just highly encourage anybody, if you want to be a 3D artist, take the time to learn this program, and it's going to open up the possibility for all kinds of different industries for you. So I'm Nick Zuccarello, and I hope that you've enjoyed this series, and I hope that you've learned a little bit about digital sculpting, and it's given you some things to think about and some things to start making your own creations. It's been a pleasure to go ahead and show you all this material.